Somebody Else's Gentleman. Written by P.O. Dixon. Read by Lily. Chapter 1. Some Natural Importance. September 1811. Elizabeth lifted her hand and shielded her eyes, protecting them from the bright sun. Her gaze drifted over the rippling waves. She could easily find some modicum of tranquility at the pond, mere footsteps from the manor house in Longbourn village. Gliding swans, their wings rippling, quacking ducks bobbing up and down, and flocking geese calling out, abounded. She found the quiet solitude of the isolated pond on the outskirts of the estate more to her liking. A tranquil body of water of some natural importance, it always proved a welcome respite from the hysterical state at Elizabeth's home. How enchanting the pond is, Elizabeth thought. Why would I wish to be any place else when such delightful charms await me here? Elizabeth took a deep breath of the fresh air, composing herself. She opened her arms wide, closed her eyes, and inhaled deeply. She repeated this exercise several times, taking in the clean air and allowing it to uplift her spirits with its soothing effects. After she had taken in her fill, she opened her eyes and began occupying herself in deep reflection on the world outside her private sanctuary. The need to seek refuge from the hectic pace at home was undoubtedly a trait she inherited from her father, Thomas Bennet. His solace was being alone in his library with his books, although it had not always been that way. He used to enjoy long outings at that very spot Elizabeth now cherished as her own little piece of paradise, usually with Elizabeth in tow. There, he spoke to her of distant places, different languages, and diverse cultures while they watched the tiny sailboat he had made for her floating on the water, the same toy boat she had earlier tethered to a low-hanging branch and cast adrift on the pond. Her father was a fount of information. Even as a young child, Elizabeth was always eager to take it all in. That was years and years ago. Now Mr. Bennet hardly bothered doing anything that required a modicum of exertion. Not paying attention to his family was his most egregious offence. No, he would much rather make fun of them. Elizabeth sighed. She had her father's penchant for mocking her mother as her excuse for being at the pond that day. Her mother, Fanny Bennet, had been going on and on about Netherfield Park, the estate that abutted her father's, and its being let at last. She spoke of its new occupant being a single young man from the north, and how he must be in want of a wife, preferably one of her 5 daughters. All her father had to do was consent to her mother's request to call on the young man, which, in Elizabeth's opinion, was perfectly reasonable. Though she did not always agree with her mother's matchmaking antics, in this case her mother was right. If Mr. Bennet did not visit the new neighbour, then none of them could do so. Mrs. Bennet was not the only one excited because a new eligible gentleman had arrived in their midst. Elizabeth had to admit to being a little intrigued too. There was no security to be had in living on an estate entailed away from the family's female line. Say what one will about my mamma, she is keenly aware of the perils, despite my father not caring. But then again, such perils would only come to be once my father was to pass away, at which point his earthly concerns must indeed cease. And if none of my sisters or I should marry before my father's demise, what might become of us? Why would Longbourn's new owner not toss us into the hedgerows as my mamma fears? It was a hot, late summer day. The deep coolness of the water looked so refreshing, half tempting Elizabeth to take a swim. Having walked to the isolated pond, she was not sure she was up to the exertion. She was rather tired from not having slept very well the night before. Her younger sister Lydia had upended the entire household's night with constant complaints of feeling poorly. I am sure I would not be so worn out had Lydia not made such a fuss. But alas, when Lydia is miserable, everyone is miserable. Added to that, she knew not to swim alone. Elizabeth decided it best to sit on the bank and dip her feet into the water. She rid herself of her shoes and stockings. It felt good. Through the years, She had spent so many hours sitting on that bank, watching her little toy sailboat float idly. Thoughts of one day sailing across the water often drifted through her mind. What must it be like to visit faraway places? Elizabeth's wont to read fueled her desire to visit other parts of the world. Perhaps one day my own gallant knight will charge in on his white horse and carry me far, far away from Hertfordshire. She chuckled inside. Surely one can dream. In truth, Elizabeth knew her future husband would not ride in on a white horse. She knew he would not show up on her wedding day, dressed like an outlandish knight in shining armour, and take her away. He is far more likely to come riding on a little grey donkey. A farmer, perhaps, and take me away to some small village. Perhaps we might settle down in a quaint house with 4 or 5 little children. Her eager imaginations sometimes got away from her and envisioned grander things: a house in town, many fine carriages, fancy jewels, ample pin money, and, not to be forgotten, a country estate with lakes and streams and a large manor house backed by wooded hills. It would indeed be nice if I were to marry a gentleman capable of providing such things, but it will never happen. She knew it. Yet and still, it is just as easy to dream of a grand manner of living as it is to dream of more modest means. I posit my time is far better spent dreaming of the former. In that vein, Elizabeth wondered what the supposed gentleman would look like. Would he be handsome? How handsome would he be? Would he be of noble blood? She wondered what kinds of things he would do for her. Would he treat her well? Would he love her, treasure and adore her? Having recently celebrated her 20th birthday, another thought came to mind. What is taking my knight so long to come riding in to take me away? A strong breeze blew some loose hair out of her face. Yawning, she outstretched her arms above her head, clasping her hands. Perhaps it is time to return to Longbourn. Elizabeth stood and smoothed her skirt, shielding her eyes from the bright sun. She pored over the pond, reflecting the sun's rays. How vexing! Amid her musings, she had lost sight of her toy sailboat. She plainly saw the string used to tether her boat dangling from the leafy branch, but somehow the boat had broken free. At length she glimpsed its tiny sail reflecting the sunlight. The boat drifted farther and farther away from her. Retrieving the tiny boat was essential for sentimental value, if nothing else, being that her father had handcrafted it for her when she was but a child. I have kept it all these years. I shall not part with it now. Her shoes and stockings she had earlier discarded. Now everything needs to go. That is everything except my chemise, she thought, while undressing and tossing her other clothing to the ground. Elizabeth had no choice, despite echoes of warnings instilled in her since her youth not to swim alone. She could not lose one of her most cherished possessions. Besides, she always considered herself a decent swimmer, and she did not know what the harm would be. She waded into the pond, the water creeping up and up her ankles until she was knee-high in the pond, and then she began swimming. For a moment she lost sight of the boat entirely. She swam on. When Elizabeth could see the toy sailboat again, she then contemplated the rest of her way. How upsetting. She had swum even farther than she had thought she would have to. She had never swum so far alone. It was deeper than she thought, and the pond no longer looked pleasant and inviting. She pondered the dangers of the murky water, its density, its subtle currents, and its temperature. Not that any such thoughts mattered. Elizabeth had come too far to turn back empty-handed, and she was closer to the boat than she was to the bank anyway. Stroke by stroke, she swam toward the toy sailboat until she was near enough to reach it with her fingertips. Gently, she pulled the sailboat to her and clasped it to her chest. She was about to swim back, but a sharp pain arrested her leg. Utterly excruciating pain. Oh no, this cannot be happening. My leg is cramping. Unable to swim, she released her grip on the sailboat and clutched her calf instead. She reacted in horror, her head sinking just beneath the choppy surface. The more she panicked, the greater her peril became. But what was she to do? The pain in her leg was debilitating. Submerging below the surface, frantically bobbing to the top, there was nothing but water as far as her eyes could see. Floundering, Elizabeth screamed out as loud as she could. Her movements grew sluggish. Then her head submerged under the water again, and she struggled to hold her breath. I am drowning. Struggling, thrashing, she could not save herself. She cried out in terror, desperately aware of the perilous water and the helplessness of her situation. A scream ripped from her throat as her head went under the water. She struggled to break the surface once again. Disoriented, panicked, she could not breathe. Elizabeth was not sure where she was. Gasping for breath, she struggled to get her bearings. She tried to scream, but she could not. There were more bubbles, and then she was sinking in water, water that was entirely black. No one is coming for me. No one. I do not want to die. Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy capped off his mad gallop through the park with a leisurely stroll, his horse trailing slightly behind. Having removed his coat, he had it folded over his arm. His loosened cravat hung casually around his neck. Although he was far, far away from his home in Derbyshire, his own estate boasted of several lakes and streams, so it was only natural he should find himself in such an idyllic, albeit isolated spot. His being there during that time of year was uppermost in Darcy's mind. What on earth had his friend Charles Bingley been thinking of letting an estate in Hertfordshire? Of all places, Darcy scoffed. At least Bingley did not come right out and buy the place. What a mistake that would have been to make such an enormous commitment after seeing the estate for only a few minutes. Still, his friend needed Darcy's tutelage in the management of such a large property. Darcy honed his experience in one of the grandest estates in Derbyshire, Pemberley. Despite years of watching and learning from his father, the late Mr. George Darcy, Darcy's turn to assume the role as the master came sooner than he would have wished. If nothing else, his time in Hertfordshire might give him leave to escape his own responsibilities, even if only for a short while. Besides being responsible for hundreds of people's livelihoods, Darcy had also assumed the role of co-guardian of a sister more than a decade his junior. Her name was Georgiana, and Darcy really loved her. Unfortunately, he came close to losing her that past summer, and to a fate that would almost have been worse than death. His young sister fell prey to the vilest man, a Mr. George Wickham. He was bent on gaining control of her fortune of £30,000 had they eloped to Gretna Green, as the scoundrel had intended. Fortunately, Darcy arrived at Ramsgate in time to put an end to the scheme. Darcy now walked along beside a tranquil pond just on the edge of what he supposed was his friend's estate. All things considered, he really needed this solace. To that day, the aftermath of the Ramsgate affair wreaked havoc on his equanimity. He hoped never to lay eyes on George Wickham, who incidentally had once been his friend, ever again. Darcy might have returned to town with Bingley, who had gone there to retrieve the rest of their party, specifically Bingley's brother-in-law, Reginald Hurst, and his wife, Mrs. Louisa Hurst, and Bingley's other sister, Miss Caroline Bingley. Doing so would have defeated Darcy's purposes, for spending too much time with Miss Bingley was not his idea of what he ought to be doing. Moreover, rumour had it amongst their society that he was the rightful property of Miss Bingley. Unchallenged rumours at that. What did it matter to him what others thought of his future marital felicity? He knew he would never marry the young lady, and she had to know it too. Darcy understood how the scheme benefited him. Eager mammas in town with young daughters in want of husbands rarely looked his way. But as regarded the advantage to Miss Bingley, he was rather less certain. Unless she secretly aspires for something more. Darcy shook his head to perish the thought. Not that he did not like the young woman. Unlike her elder sister, who was rather less handsome and whose manners required intimacy to make them pleasing, Miss Bingley at least looked the part of an accomplished young woman with all her comely features. She was used to being admired, and she loved to be courted and waited for. Educated in one of the first private seminaries in town, and in possession of a fortune of £20,000, she was in the habit of associating with people of rank. She was, therefore, in every respect, entitled to think well of herself. No force of nature could have been more calculated to give her a high opinion of her own attractions. Mr. Darcy was very far from feeling all these sentiments for Miss Bingley. He liked her well enough, but he could not always understand her. Miss Bingley was, after all, the one who concocted the scheme of putting up such a pretence. Going along with their ruse in town was easy, especially as the two of them rarely saw each other. But now that they were to be under the same roof in Hertfordshire for months, Darcy knew he had to be careful. One false move and he might very well step into a marriage trap before he knew what he was about. Violent screams interrupted his peaceful walk, desperate cries for help sending his heartbeat racing. Mr. Darcy swiftly followed the shouts. A young woman was in the water, struggling, thrashing and floundering. "She is drowning! Help!" she cried out, her voice choked and gurgling with water. The woman battled to stay afloat. Darcy could see her dark, wet hair, her waterlogged attire, and her arms and legs flailing beneath the water. She was sinking fast. He had to save her. He dived in and swam as fast as he could to the woman. She was so far away. He feared he might not reach her in time. He would have to dive to the bottom of the pond and get her, but how deep was the water? Could he find her in time? Could he hold his breath long enough? What if I cannot find her? What if... Chapter 2. Too inviting to ignore. Darcy held the young lady in his lap, cradled in his arms. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, patting her face, his voice evidencing his concern. Her eyes fluttered, but Darcy was unable to tell if they were open or closed. Her chest slowly rose and fell with each breath. Finally, Darcy exhaled. She is safe. His loosened cravat had fallen to the ground before he dived into the water. Having retrieved it, Darcy gently wiped her face. Her steady breathing and her body's reaction to his touch informed him she was out of danger, although her eyes were shut. Instead, she nuzzled closer. She was a beautiful young woman, though not in a conventional way. She had long, dark hair and flawless skin, yet her womanly figure belied her youthful countenance. "Miss?" The voice was low, the most alluring sound Elizabeth ever heard, and accompanied by light taps on her cheek. The touch was soothing, and she could feel her body's response even in her semi-conscious state of being. "Miss?" he asked again, his voice softer, more tender, but with the music still there. It was a melody she could listen to for the rest of her life, and never grow tired of. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Miss?" Elizabeth felt as though she were in somebody's arms, someone holding her steady. She opened her eyes. "Sir?" There she was, wrapped in a man's arms, a man with a deep, melodious voice. "I am not dreaming. I most certainly am not dead." She gasped. "You rescued me?" He nodded in reply. He moistened his lower lip, an unconscious habit perhaps. As though she was oblivious to her own dishabille, Elizabeth's gaze pored over his body, the way his wet shirt clung to his broad chest, leaving little to her imagination. She seized the cravat from his hand and brushed it against his neck. "Your clothes are soaking wet." "My clothes are the least of my concerns at the moment. My thoughts are only of you, of your safety." Their gazes met. He tightened his hold, pulling her into his body. His arms tightened, his form securely wrapped around her. This was what she wanted. This was just what she needed. His closeness, his warmth, his protection, and his whispering reassurances. This was everything she desired. She had no strength to resist, or even the will to do so. Nor did she have the desire to tear her eyes away from his. His head lowered, blocking out the sight of her eyes as he sought her lips. Yes, Elizabeth thought. Never had she dreamed of a kiss so perfect, instantly arousing every part of her body, much-needed warmth coursing through her veins. A low moan escaped from her. She had never been kissed before. How fitting that she should share her first kiss with someone so beautiful. As he lifted his head, his eyes inquiring, it surprised Elizabeth to find she had never felt so alive, so comforted in a passionate embrace. Their lips met once more, and she felt a weakness in her limbs. Her hand rose to his shoulder, and the touch of him made her sink into his body. They were perfectly suited with her slight weight to his tall form. She was aware of only him, of how he held her, of the beating of his heart, how he had been the means of saving her from certain death. How grateful she was for his nearness, how safe she felt in his arms. Her reaction to him was palpable. Elizabeth had always been attracted to men of intelligence, and he must certainly be an intelligent man. She could read it in his eyes, in the way he conducted himself. His mind was keen, and it showed. His mouth closed on hers, and his tongue made a tentative foray. Oh, this is wonderful. The kiss was like nothing she had ever imagined, and she had given the matter a fair amount of thought. Elizabeth's sense of modesty and decorum seemed to have been washed away with the pond's water. His lips, so soft, she thought, in between light kisses. Then she caught her breath with the incidental brush of his arm. She opened her eyes and gazed at him. An avid learner, Elizabeth was always improving her mind through extensive reading, including subjects about the intimate goings-on between a man and a woman. What she was experiencing was indeed the stuff of romantic novels. Knowing as she now did that life was too short, she meant to enjoy every minute. The man, this perfect stranger. She just wanted him to hold her. She wanted them to keep doing what they were doing until she felt safe again. Safe enough to surrender the protection, the pleasures, and the reassurances he bestowed so freely, so willingly, and so generously. Much like my knight in shining armour. Elizabeth studied the young man. He was tall and lean. His face was all planes and angles, much like his physique. His face was the most handsome thing she had ever seen. Dark brows arching over dark, brooding eyes tapered to a noble cleft chin and well-sculpted lips. His protruding Adam's apple completed this picture of perfection. The sight of him mesmerized Elizabeth. It was a miracle he had even been there and rescued her. Who was he? From where had he come? Was he even real, or was she dreaming? "Your clothes, where are they?" he asked. "We ought to get you out of this." His eyes fell on her wafer-thin chemise. It would not do. "They are by the tree just over there?" "I shall get them for you." "No, no, not just yet. Pray do not let me go," she said, shivering. "I am utterly dazed with what almost happened. It is as if I was everywhere, at once, and nowhere, all at once, you see." "Yes, I see," he said in a low voice. "I know what you mean. That is how I feel, holding you in my arms like this." She smiled. "I hope I am not a bother." He shook his head. "Would you be willing to hold me until I am settled?" "I would be more than happy to," he replied. "Just for a few moments more," she said. "For as long as you want me to." Comforted, Elizabeth nuzzled her cheek against the gallant stranger's broad chest. Then, slowly, she drifted off to sleep. Chapter 3. Half in Love. Already, Darcy returned to the pond nearly every day. Whether he secretly wished to see the young woman he had saved from drowning, he dared not confess, not even to himself. All he knew was being there brought him great solace. The pond was peaceful and, by now, his favourite place in all of Hertfordshire. The sky clear and bright, and the sun's rays reflecting off the water's surface recalled him to the natural beauty of his Derbyshire home. While visiting one day, he spotted a toy sailboat that had crashed into the water's bank. Retrieving it, Darcy turned the little sailboat upside down. He knew and understood its significance at once when he saw the name carved on its underside, Lizzy. So this is the reason the mysterious young lady was out swimming alone in the pond. She meant to retrieve this sailboat. Darcy bit his lower lip, remembering the taste of hers. Lizzie, he silently considered. I suppose it is short for Elizabeth. Elizabeth? At least he now had a name for the bewitching creature who haunted his dreams both day and night. Whenever he thought of her, which was all the time since he first laid eyes on her, one question stood out in his mind. The question was not why he retrieved her dry things and remained with her until her chemise was dry enough for him to see that she was correctly attired before quitting her side. But rather, why did he kiss her? He could think of no reasonable explanation that might hold up in the day's reality. What I know with absolute certainty is it was impossible to stop once I had made a start. Once we made a start, he silently corrected himself, for she seemed as eager to continue their amorous pursuits as he was, and was he ever? Else he would not reimagine every second with her repeatedly. Returning his attention to the sailboat, he noted the damage to its cloth sail. He tucked it under his arm and made a mental note to repair it upon his return to the manor house. Speaking of which, he reminded himself that he had stayed away long enough. As his friend Charles Bingley's guest, Darcy owed it to him to put up some pretense of sociability. That night, the Netherfield party was to attend an assembly in Meryton, the nearby town. He had a sinking feeling that Miss Bingley would cling to him all evening, and quite frankly, he was not sure that would be a bad thing. Eager mammas with simpering daughters in want of wealthy husbands lay in wait wherever he went. Indeed, this evening will prove no exception. Later that evening, Mr. Darcy walked through the parted crowd with Miss Bingley by his side, secure in the knowledge that the eager mammas, scattered throughout the room with their silly daughters, would know not to waste their time with him. He made sure not to make eye contact with anyone as an added precaution. Suddenly there appeared before him the embodiment of all his recent dreams. It is her, indeed it is Elizabeth. I would recognize her among a sea of people. He simply stared until the moment their eyes met, and then he tore his eyes away. It is Elizabeth. Before Darcy knew what he was about, hordes of locals started forming a welcome line in front of his party. Sir William Lucas, who had made a point of calling on Netherfield soon after Bingley's arrival, took up the task of introducing everyone. One by one, family after family with unmarried daughters paraded before them. No, flaunted themselves was more like it. Donned in gowns no one in town who was anyone would dare wear, the eager females giggled, simpered, and cooed. The spectacle of it all tempted Darcy to walk away. That was until the Bennets of Longbourn landed in front of them. Now he could not tear himself away even if he tried. What he could do, however, was maintain his well-crafted stoic reserve. Let his friend Bingley put on a welcoming smile. He was bound to fall in love before the evening was over anyway. Such was his nature, always falling in and out of love with one angelic creature or another. The eldest Bennet daughter would do the job nicely, Darcy considered, with her fair skin, blonde locks, and cherubic eyes. Judging by Bingley's smile, he is half in love with her already. While Bingley gushed throughout the introductions, Darcy barely nodded at the young lady. He made a point of reacting in that same indifferent manner during all the introductions, including his formal introduction to Miss Elizabeth Bennet. Finally, Darcy had a full name for the intoxicating creature who invaded his dreams. Of course, that was the only way he would know her. In his dreams. It was better that way. Who was to say he had not encouraged her expectations already, given the way they first met. He would not look at her luscious lips, arched in a teasing smile, or her dark, bewitching eyes daring him to do so. Neither would he admire her light and pleasing figure or be affected by her playful exchange with his friend Bingley. As for his treasonous body, it had better not betray him now, of all times. Darcy released a deep breath, one he did not even know he was holding in, when finally the Bennets were on their way. Stealing away from her friends for a breath of fresh air during the middle of a public assembly was not the wisest thing Elizabeth could have done. But exceedingly vexed, young ladies did not always comport themselves judiciously. Elizabeth exhaled a frustrated breath she had been holding in for some time, even while dancing on the crowded assembly room floor. She was not always dancing, though, for there were far too many young ladies in want of partners, and far too few available gentlemen. Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy could not even be ranked among the latter group. Not that he was not available, he simply was not willing. She heard someone complain of overhearing him tell his friend Mr. Bingley that he was in no mood to give consequence to young ladies who had been slighted by other men. Slighted by other men? Was that how he pictured a young woman in want of a dance partner? Was such a remark not a slight in and of itself? The audacity of Mr. Darcy to speak that way, especially as Elizabeth had been without a dance partner several times throughout the evening. And poor Miss Bingley. Mr. Darcy did not even dance with her when it was clear she would have appreciated the preference. Like two peas in a pod, he did not dance, and thus she did not dance. Are not the two of them perfectly designed for each other? Truth be told, part of Elizabeth was instantly envious that Miss Bingley had this man's attention. Either that or piteous. Yes, the other woman was practically attached to his side, but he scarcely showed any symptom of affection for her. She, on the other hand, gazed at him like he was a prized possession. She clung to his arm, despite its being tightly clenched by his side. Elizabeth could hardly understand this picture of Mr. Darcy standing beside his would-be bride. Why the utter lack of affection, for she knew him to be a most passionate man. A familiar wave of excitement washed over her in remembrance of their time together by the pond. Time very much like a dream. But how could it have been a dream when she had his cravat neatly tucked away in her drawer? Its smell always carried her back to that moment in time when it seemed the two of them were the only two people in the world. Is that the problem? Does Mr. Darcy feel guilty over his unguarded behaviour toward me at the pond? Is that why he scarcely acknowledged me during my family's introduction to his party? Because of his connection with Miss Bingley? Does he fear what happened between us might jeopardise his situation with her? Whatever is the case, I do not mean to make myself upset about it. However, I shall oblige Mr. Darcy in spades if feigning indifference is how he intends to proceed. Miss Bingley can knock the proud man over the head with a club and drag him off to the wedding altar tonight for all I care. Another part of her could not wash away the vision of him inside the assembly hall. So tall, so handsome with his noble mien. Rumours circulated he had £10,000 a year and he owned half of Derbyshire. Everything about him spoke the truth of said rumours. He wore the finest clothing of anyone in the room. His attire was more elegant than his lady's, which was really saying something. Miss Bingley was donned in the height of London fashion, so far as Elizabeth could tell. Miss Bingley was a comely young lady, to be sure. Both she and her sister enjoyed their fair share of beauty. But, as proud as the young woman must certainly be for all her wealth and accomplishments, she was little more than a shrinking violet, standing next to Mr. Darcy. The gentleman exuded power, wealth, and status from head to toe. Speaking of his attire that evening, his white, pristine cravat was knotted and tied with an expert hand in a perfect diagonal, the perfect knot for a perfect neck, forcing another one of Mr. Darcy's white cravats to cross her mind. Elizabeth shook her head. No, it may have been his once, but it is mine now, and I have no intention of returning it to him. Her reasoning made sense. Mr. Darcy's cravat served as the one thing she had that reminded her she nearly lost her life that fateful day, that she had not dreamed it. Her knight in shining armour really did rescue her, and then caringly attended to her in his warm and comforting embrace. It really happened. Yes, she would definitely keep it, but she was sure she would not be tucking it under her pillow that night. Elizabeth's mind wandered to their time together at the pond, the feel of his lips brushing against hers, and the tantalizing caress of his fingers dancing down her neck. He had awakened her desires in a way she never dreamed possible. The memory still made her body ache for his touch. How were such feelings to be endured, now knowing what she knew about the gentleman who had saved her life? That he was haughty and above his company and cared little about the feelings of others, apparently even hers. Chapter 4. Truth in That. Miss Bingley's patience with her brother's morning guests had worn thin. Nothing exhausted her more than making small talk with self-important country nobodies. "I thought the steady flow of neighbours would never cease," cried the young woman when the last of the callers took their leave of Netherfield. Her elder sister, Mrs. Hurst, sighed. "Yes, it seems every mamma in the county has decided our brother is the rightful property of one of their daughters. Our brother is exceedingly popular. I imagine he would not have been half so much if he had not danced with every young lady at the assembly, even if he is so charming. Let us not forget handsome and rich." "Heaven forbid," said Mrs. Hurst, "and let us not forget the adage that a single young man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." "There is truth in that," said Miss Bingley, nodding. She turned to her brother. "Perhaps you ought to have exhibited more reserve like our Mr. Darcy." Bingley scoffed. "Heaven forbid! I cannot recall the last time I saw Darcy standing around looking so stupid." He looked at his friend and continued, "I did not see you dance even once." "Much to Caroline's chagrin," quipped her sister. Darcy said, "I'm sure your sister's decision not to dance was one entirely of her own making. As for me, Bingley, you know how I am not fond of dancing unless I am particularly acquainted with my partner. At such an assembly as that, it would have been insupportable. I dare say there was scarcely a single woman in the room who it would not have been a punishment to me to stand up with." "What a shame that you should say so. I, for one, have never met with so many pleasant girls in my life as I did that evening, and there were several of them who were uncommonly pretty." "I take it the one uppermost in your mind is Miss Bennet," said Mrs. Hurst. "Indeed, she is the most beautiful creature I ever beheld." "You would say such a thing," said Darcy with a slight eye-roll. "While we are on the subject, it quite surprised me that the second eldest Bennet daughter did not accompany her mother and sisters on this morning's call." Miss Bingley frowned. "What was her name?" "Elizabeth," Darcy began with far more eagerness than he had intended. "Miss Elizabeth." Miss Bingley threw him a puzzled look. Then she said, "I think I should like to get better acquainted with both of the eldest sisters. From what I observed at the assembly, they seem to be more sensible than most of the young ladies we have met, although I can hardly credit the three younger girls with a modicum of sensibility. The eldest daughter is the most amiable creature I ever saw, and so easy to talk to. I suspect Miss Elizabeth to be of a similar temperament," said the other woman. "Indeed," said Miss Bingley. "The sister next to Miss Eliza in age has a pedantic air and conceited manner. The two youngest are silly, wild-spirited, and bound to make their family ridiculous unless someone curbs their behaviour. The youngest is the silliest, with a strong dash of wanton recklessness thrown in." "Miss Eliza?" Darcy asked, as though that was the only thing he took away from Miss Bingley's unflattering testimony. "Indeed," Miss Bingley began. "Short for Miss Elizabeth. How should I refer to the young lady?" He shrugged. "Eliza is not a name I would choose if I were you. It reflects a heightened sense of either intimacy or disdain. I do not believe you have known her long enough to suffer either of those sentiments. Oh, intimacy for sure. And though I have yet to earn the right to boast of such a connection at this very moment, I have every intention of garnering that privilege soon. Darcy was about to ask why, but then he felt he had already said too much on the subject of Miss Elizabeth Bennet. The last thing he wanted was for Miss Bingley to grow suspicious. As for Elizabeth's not calling on Netherfield with her family that morning, he did not know what to make of it. Was she purposely avoiding him? Well, I think it is wonderful that you plan on getting better acquainted with the eldest Bennet daughters. They are our closest neighbours in proximity, after all. What more convenient recipe for intimacy is there than that? Asked Bingley. Here, here, said Mr. Hurst, raising his glass in a mock toast. Then it is decided we shall return the Bennets' morning call the first thing tomorrow, declared Mrs. Hurst. Miss Bingley nodded. Agreed. I should be happy to accompany you on your visit, Bingley returned. I see no benefit in denying myself the opportunity of spending more time with Miss Bennet. He looked at his friend. Should you like to join us as well? Darcy scoffed and then stood to quit the room. Do not be ridiculous. He went straight to his apartment. Elizabeth's sailboat caught his eye. He had yet to repair its sail and thus decided it was as good a time as any to start. In truth, Elizabeth's noticeable absence that morning frustrated him far more than he wished, and he could do nothing about it. While repairing the sail, Darcy could not stop his mind from wandering. He kept thinking about Elizabeth's beautiful bright eyes, her barely held smiles, and her teasing personality. But most of all, he could not help thinking of having her near-naked body in his arms after rescuing her from the pond, of attending to her safety, of staying with her so long wanting to comfort her, and of wishing their situation allowed him to do more. Indeed, more of the things they did every night since he first laid eyes on her. If only in his dreams. Their secret encounters, their shared intimacies, and the way she fit so wondrously in his arms. Thoughts of their formal introduction at the assembly crept into his mind. Darcy couldn't help but recall the way her eyes danced when she laughed. She was the most bewitching creature he had ever seen. Darcy closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. He could neither control it nor ignore it. He could not stop his thoughts of her, or the way she made him feel when he thought about her. His desire for her was so strong. He feared in the end that it might cloud his judgment. For a second, he had even given some thought to calling on the Bennets at Longbourn with the others. But, thankfully, he came to his senses before it was too late. Until he could get his thoughts of Elizabeth under proper regulation, he meant to keep as far away from her as possible. Thank you for listening to Somebody Else's Gentleman, Chapters 1 through 4. If you have enjoyed this story thus far, and I hope you have, you will not want to miss what happens next. Subscribe to this channel today and be among the first to be notified when Somebody Else's Gentleman, the complete audiobook, is available for your listening pleasure. Your likes, subscribes, comments, and shares help this channel grow.